Great, fantastic. Hello, everyone, and once again, welcome to this Meet the Funders event on Living Today with Tomorrow in Mind. Today, we are joined by Jane Yeomans from Transformation Cornwall, Martin Wright, representing Kenwyn Church, and Ben Lilly, Environmental Officer at the Diocese, Creation Care. A little bit of housekeeping today. This is a webinar, which means you can see us, but we can't see you, but we would love to get your contributions in the chat. And I can see a couple of people have already put in there where they're from, what they're interested in. We'll be using the chat to do some Q&A later on in this webinar. So by all means, pop all your questions, all your observations on there, and we'll be sure to pick those up. As a reminder, all the presentations and slides from today will be shared after the event is over, so don't worry too much about note making, and the recording will also be available. So to start us off this morning, I'll be handing over to Jane, who will be telling us a little bit more about finding funding for environmental projects. And Jane, I believe I'm sharing your screen, is that right?
Yes, you're sharing my slides, is that okay?
Of course.
Great. Okay, so do you want to put the first slide up? And that's a great introduction, Mike. Thank you for putting in the chat. I'm very glad that you're interested in funding. Meet Funders is a bit of a flute. We get a lot of interest because funding is the kind of one of the #1 things around kind of project development, and it's a very popular program. So my name's Jane Yeomans. I head up Transformation Cornwall. So I work with Daniel, and Meet the Funders is a programme brought in partnership between Transformation Cornwall and the Diocese of Truro. So Transformation Cornwall strengthens faith-based social action in Cornwall. And we work with people and organisations of all faiths and none. And today I'm going to do a presentation on environmental funding and why it's everyone's business. So what I'm going to do firstly is to show you the session slide. Daniel, if we can move on to look at what we're going to be covering today. So firstly, why your project matters. How to make your project the best it can environmentally be, top tips, some examples of what funders say. I'm going to take you through a funding example for an environmental project and also link you to some resources on where to look for funders. So if we can have the first proper slide, Daniel. Now, excuse the quality of this photo here. It was actually taken from a Big Issue magazine, I think earlier in this year, and I sent the copy on to Ben. I was very inspired by this quote from Greta Thunberg. As soon as we take action, there is hope. And I think it echoes the Christian message of hope. And I'd really like it to help us to take action in our projects today. So let's move on to how to make your project the best it can environmentally be. Okay, now I have borrowed this slide from Community Energy Plus, who actually supported a Meet the Funders event, a spring event that we did in 2019, but I think it's a really helpful model to take onto your projects and your project development, looking at how we can become carbon neutral, where we need to consider that in how we work, how we reduce waste, create energy, travel, how we consume, how we live, how we enhance our environment. And really, it's an invitation to take this model to wherever you are in your project development and start to apply that, to all aspects of your project development and right the way through, and really make key changes there. So let's go to top tips for funding for environmental projects. So firstly, I'd like to invite you to don't go straight for the big stuff. If you're looking for solar panels for your church, if you're looking to make your church more sustainable, as a first taster and as a first step, I would suggest that going to improve your lighting through better energy, into better energy efficient lighting would be considered before installing kind of solar panels. What you can do is incorporate your kind of first stage movements and progress into your funding bids. And so you're telling a funder that you've actually got experience of developing this, that it's on a progression path, and that you have really kind of thought through and you're engaged with actually making sustainable change. So secondly, do think about how people can access your project. Think about your staff and your visitors and your volunteers. Can you direct them to local public transport links and build in provisions such as cycle racks to just normalise kind of walking, public transport, promoting car sharing, cycling networks? Think about that access. You know, it's really key. Include adequate monitoring and reporting systems. Don't think of this as the boring bits, but think about how you'll measure your impact, how you'll celebrate your impact, and what you will let people know has been the difference of your project. Do learn from other projects' good practice, and we'll be hearing more about that from Martin. But before submitting your application, look at case studies of what funders have already funded, what they're interested in. Seek advice from other neighbourhood partners and ask around. Always, you know, if you want to, we're at the end of the phone, or, you know, do drop us a line. And if we can kind of try and link you to people and projects that have synergy with what you're doing or what you're trying to do, you know, we can link you up that way. Remember, sustainability is also about the social impacts. So encouraging a greater diversity of visitors and sharing learning with them so that they feel that they can and that they want to make an impact in their own homes and communities. So very much so, if you're kind of use the work that you're doing as a bit of a kind of pebble in a pond idea to kind of introduce and encourage people in your community to make a difference. And use your project to make the world a better place, which is exactly the point of this workshop, and exactly where we are wanting to go with that kind of Greta Thunberg thought. You know, it's around collective local action can really make a big difference, and that's what we're getting at here with many of your projects, no matter where you are. Now, on my next slide, Daniel. Great. I've just put some quotes here on what funders say. And I'm going to take that first example just to say we will pass on all of the resources from today, and and these presentations, we'll email them all out, and they'll also be on our website. So don't worry too much about making notes. But just a couple of quotes here that I want to kind of highlight. So the National Heritage Lottery Fund, so they have in their quote, "We ensure that our impact and the impact of our projects are no longer damaging the world around us and are enhancing, protecting and benefiting the places and people we support." So in your funding application to them, that is what you need to echo. That is how if your project does fit with what they're looking to fund, then these are the words and the kind of actions that you will want to kind of pull out into your application. So enhancing, protecting and benefiting people and places. Esme Fairbairn say that we want to ensure that our natural world is restored and protected, and that the and that people benefit from that recovery. Working with others, will contribute to three key impact goals. So preserved and improved species health and habitats, clean and healthy fresh water, and sustainable and ethical food. So that is those are their three key areas that they're interested in. So next slide, please, Daniel. I'm going to look briefly at one environmental grant that's open right now. And here I've taken the example of Together for Our Planet from the National Lottery Community Fund. So this grant is open right now. The application deadline, I think, is 5 p.m. on, and I think also that's a Friday, the 18th of November. So what are we now? So that's about 6 weeks' time. So this is a grant programme for applications between £1,000 and £10,000, and there's a wide range of project costs supported. And there's also a wide range of project areas supported. They could cover food, transport, energy, waste, consumption, the natural environment. And they specifically say that the project needs to reflect what matters in your community. So you're going to be, if you're applying to this, you're going to be showing how your community want this project to happen. What was it that came from your community that made this project get developed? What sparked your interest? What I really like about this fund is that they particularly say that you don't need to be an expert in any of these areas to apply, and that they're particularly interested to hear from people starting to think about taking action on climate change in their communities. I think it's a really good first step fund for a project. I've also put the web link on there so that you can find out more about the fund and look to see if it's applicable for a project that you'd want. Another thing about Together for Our Planet is that there's a huge amount of community groups that can apply. So registered charities, CIO, community interest organisations, community interest companies, village groups if they've got a constitution, a community organisation, you know, loads of organisations. It's very, very inclusive. Daniel, if I can have the next slide, please. Okay, so where to look for funders, and on this slide I've included pictures of resources, and if you can see in the smaller type there, I've also included the web links so that they'll all be live when you get the presentations. So I've put three resources here. So firstly, I've put our Meet the Funders Spring Event 2021, which was in late May of this year. There's a comprehensive resource document there with, I don't know the number of funders, but it's a whole host of funders that are in that document. That's a really good place to start. The second image is our grant for groups in Cornwall. So Transformation Cornwall do a monthly update of two grant lists. One is hardship grants for individuals in need, and the second list is grant for groups in Cornwall. And so what I'm encouraging you here to look at is the grant for groups in Cornwall. Again, I've put the web link there. It comes out monthly or it's updated monthly. And if you click on the web link, it will automatically come to the latest edition. So it comes out on the first Friday of the month. So the 3rd of September was the last one, and I think the Friday falls on the 1st of October. It will be updated. So that is a list of all current open grants that might be of interest to faith-based organisations and grassroots organisations within Cornwall. The third resource there on that image is from the Church of England stewardship team, which is an annual, I think it's annual, or it might possibly be updated every 6 months. It's their charitable grants for churches. It has a number of kind of environmental and sustainability funding grants. I think in this example, is it from page 32 to 58 or something like that. But you know, it's a really good go-to place. Again, I've put the web link up there. But as ever, I don't want to kind of complicate this too much. If ever you've got a project idea and you don't know where to start, you know, do come back to us. You know, I'll give you my contact details and you know, pick our brains, and we can often steer you in the right direction for a possible funder or funders who might be interested in your project. Next slide, please, Daniel. Okay, I've put 3 other additional resources. Now, the Church of England on this web link, they have some fantastic, I've been watching them, webinars, either coming up that you can register for, or they record those webinars, and they're about a whole wealth of topics that I've got some examples here. There's the basics of heat pumps, eco quick wins, environmental heating for your church. But I would just invite you to kind of link, you know, have a look at that, and you know, it's really good. The other resource that I have is the Eco Church, which is by a Rocha. They've got some great webinars again on carbon footprint reduction schemes, lighting, insulation, buildings, environmentally friendly projects. That's a great link there. And the Heritage Lottery Fund has some good practice guidance, really good kind of thoughtful things on, you know, on environmental good practice, best practice within kind of older buildings and heritage. We also, in our Meet the Funders community workshops, particularly workshop 6, coming up in November, I think it's the 5th or the 6th, we'll send you that link. We will be looking at buildings, and we have we are going to be doing that live actually in a church that has successfully installed underfloor heating, and also we're going to be joined by an expert by experience who's made some substantial changes in their church. So I hope that gives you just a taster, but what I'd like to do is really kind of encourage, and I can see that there's something in chat already, but I'd really like to encourage us to pick up some of this in kind of questions and discussions towards the later end of this workshop. So the last slide, Daniel, is just my contact details. There we go. You should all have those, but anyway, we'll make sure, as I say, the whole slide deck goes out to you. So that's me. Now, I saw there was a comment on chat and Mike. So I say it's page not found on our website. Oh, that's terrible. Now I will look into that. Daniel, I'm dashing off to Penzance after. Can I leave that with you? Because it will be, I can say,
yeah,
Mike,
of course,
working by 3 p.m. today. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, no worries. I will absolutely, as a matter of priority, have a look at that and get that fixed at 12 o'clock today. Thank you so much for that, Jane. That was really, really helpful. And hopefully, I think one of the good things is that, when you look at all those resources, you see that there is a wealth of funding opportunities and help and best practice guidance available out there. So it should reassure you that people out there are here to come behind you. And of course, so are we at Transformation Cornwall, so is Ben. We're all just an email away. Next in our lineup this morning, we have Ben Lilly, Diocesan Environment Officer. I hope that's your proper and right title, is it, Ben?
Yeah, something like that. OI works as well.
OI also works. That's fantastic. And you're here to tell us a little bit more about your role and the new Kernau Green Church Ward, I believe. And I'm also sharing your slides.
You are. I'll attempt to do my best. Chris Whitty, next slide, please. So yeah, if you can kick me off with the front page, that'd be great.
Perfect.
Well, good morning, friends. As Daniel's already said, my name's Ben, and I'm the Diocesan Environment Officer, or the DEO, for the Anglican Diocese of Truro. When we gathered for Meet the Funders Day earlier in the year, I shared the Bible story of a farmer who sowed seed onto different ground. Seed fell onto pathways, rocky ground, thorny ground, and good soil. And we reflected on how challenging the ground might be, especially where it's been damaged by bad practice, thoughtless or selfish action. We also reflected that if we're serious about changing the environment, changing the ground for good where we live, then the time is now. And I suggested that living today with tomorrow in mind is all about choosing our actions today that will increase restoration, flourishing, sustainability, and fruitfulness for tomorrow. And it's interesting to see that as we saw in some of those funders' declarations of intent, there were those words of restoration, the words of flourishing, of sustainability. So it's hugely key in the world where we live, and we need to be drivers of this change. But today I want to develop that thinking a little further and offer some avenues of actions that are unashamedly targeted at the church and all faith communities. I will say that this has been developed primarily for the Anglican Church in Cornwall and the 2 parishes in Devon. So there will be some Anglican nuances like PCCs, parochial church councils. But what I do want to say is that we are entirely open to sharing this with all people of faith and goodwill. And if it sounds after I've spoken like this is something you'd like to be involved in, I'd encourage you to find a lead creation care individual or your environment officer within your denomination or church and ask them to contact me. We are super keen to partner with this understanding of creation care right across our different flavors of church throughout Cornwall. And I'll also say that actually as part of churches together in Cornwall, this shared understanding of creation care, to cherish creation, cut carbon and speak up, has been adopted across churches together in Cornwall as our shared view. How we interpret that as different churches is down to each denomination and faith group. But it was great that we can come together under this title of creation care. So about 12 months ago, Truro Diocese reviewed its strategic approach to the environment and established these 3 overarching principles to guide us and against which we could set meaningful stretch targets. Not least in here is achieving carbon neutrality by 2030. And that's going to be something of a task, I will say. But these 3 have become our environmental mantra: to cherish creation, to cut carbon, and to speak up. And the following slides offer some ideas of how together we might achieve this. So next slide, please, Daniel. That was my very best, Chris Whitty. So under Cherish Creation, there may be many ways that you could work. And what I suggest is the one avenue here is about partnering with Cornwall Wildlife Trust. Now, I think we're going to have some more info on this later on. But over the years, church yards and land have sometimes been viewed as the ball and chain around the church's leg, with the community complaining when it's not tidy enough, or indeed now maybe complaining when it's too tidy. But the reality is that with great signing and good information, these churchyards can be the most extraordinary places for biodiversity and a revival of species. They are wonderful, peaceful places. So you could cherish creation in all sorts of ways. I noticed that there's a question up in Q&A about how could I use my garden? But actually, one of the things is about a natural rewilding of land. However we think we should use the land to beautify it, it's never as good as nature's work. And when we allow a certain rewilding of space, it allows species and biodiversity to increase. It can be things as simple as not deadheading your flowers so rapidly in autumn, but letting them stay longer as a food source for animals. A bit less tidy for us, but a whole lot more meaningful for all of the species that run around our gardens. If I can have the next slide, please. Cut carbon may look like switching to renewables. The opportunities now, I realize that we are in a bit of a pressure pot moment when it comes to energy supply, but there are still multiple suppliers who can give you renewable energy, both on your electric and gas supply. And my gut belief is that as churches, we should be leading the way on this. That is not to pour guilt onto churches who can't yet do that because they're locked into deals over a quarter number of years. You'd want to cut as soon as you are able. One of the easiest ways to cut carbon. Thanks. And speak up. At the moment, with COP26 coming up, there are a multitude of petitions urging the government to take action. Surfers Against Sewage have a live petition running now that you can join in with. It speaks to the life of the ocean, something that has a huge impact on our particular county. But at any given time, there are multiple petitions running. And the church has a place to be a prophetic and active voice into these places. So do get involved in that. It may mean speaking to your local member of parliament, your local parish council, or indeed encouraging members of your church family to be active in speaking out into the community. Not in the voice of condemnation, but in the voice of encouragement and uplifting, in helping other people to join in with why we must focus on the restoration of God's very good creation. So next slide, please. So these are all gathered together in this cherish creation, cut carbon, speak up. And as a result of this, we felt it was time to review the previous church award system, and we've moved it, watch out because it's a pretty tricky title move that's happened. We've gone from the Green Church Kernow Award to the Kernow Green Church Award. See what I did there? The main important thing here is that we've moved it from a multi-tiered award to a singular award. And the key point of this singular award, if I could have the next slide, please, Daniel, is to help encourage churches and faith communities into the national benchmark and recognized scheme of a Russia eco-church. So that's what the Kernow Green Church Award does. If we go to the next slide, it very simply sets out what's required. So there are 4 key actions. We're looking for churches to pass a PCC resolution to adopt a parish creation care policy. We will, in time, be creating a pro forma parish creation care policy that allows the parish to both adapt and adopt this policy, but we would ask that it includes creation care as a permanent PCC agenda item, much as we've done with safeguarding, that the annual carbon footprint return is part of the annual parish returns. This is key because it's actually part of the benchmarking, the baselining of our figures. And any funding application you come to do will ask you about your baseline figures. This is key information. It's a bit like that bit in Dragon's Den where they say, can you tell us about your turnover? And everyone gets very flustered. There's no need to get flustered with the annual carbon footprint return. It's an online tool on the Church of England's main webpage, and we've created a film which is available on the Diocesan YouTube channel, talking you through how to actually fill that in. And then we ask that there is a Creation Sunday service or Creation Tide service event in the course of the year. That's the first one. The second one is about appointing a creation care champion or an officer, or indeed, and please do hear this, a team of champions. It doesn't need to be somebody on their own, but we do ask that they are appointed and supported and have the opportunity to report to the PCC. It's not a Lone Ranger kind of role. It's about changing the DNA of the church. It's about encouraging the church together to take action. With this role established and with the PCC resolution adopted, we then ask that you register with a Russia Eco Church scheme. And even just registering is a great step forward of intent. It's a great vocal move, actually, to say to the rest of the national church, we stand with you in this same award. We stand with you and say that the environment is part of our strategic way of being as the church. And then there's the task of carrying out the initial environment audit via the Eco Church scheme. You've already been pointed to Eco Church as a resource avenue through Jane's presentation. And I will say they have some great resources about how to carry out your audit, how to achieve bronze. There's a bronze, silver and gold system, a three-tiered system. And there are great resources on how to move from one to the next. What are the sort of things that need to be achieved? And I wholly endorse and encourage you to follow that route. We particularly are following this because as a diocese, we are very keen to be able to register, which we have already done with Eco Church as a diocese, for the Eco Diocese Award. And we need churches to engage with this so that we can actually progress our own award structure from a diocesan level, because we would like to be one of the dioceses stepping forward and saying to the whole church nationally, this is absolutely a significant part of all that we do, right at the top of our agenda. If I could have the next slide, Daniel. Now, I've mentioned this name, Creation Care Champions. You might call them eco officers or green gurus, or more than likely, you're probably going to call them nothing at all. You just have these people who are already getting on with this stuff because it's what they do and it's what they love. I'm just going to give you a moment to read this slide. Have some peace for a second. So within my role as the DEO, I've been tasked with two very specific things. One is to adapt, change and encourage churches into the Kernow Green Church Award, and in so doing engagement with the Russia Eco Church scheme. And the second one is about creating a network of creation care champions. And to this end, we are just in the process of setting up some dates and venues. There'll probably be 3 across the diocese, in a kind of a north, south and central location where we can actually gather in person and share stories of successes and challenges, look at how we might do training and development for people who are interested in this role. But very much it's about honest engagement. I'm aware that this is not an easy thing to bring to the church every day. I'm aware that there are churches for whom the concept of speaking about the environment is just one job too many. It's another thing too far. But we would want to constantly be saying that caring for God's very good creation should be right at the very top of all that we do, and should flow through every part of church life. But we're looking for creation care champions. And if you think that could be you, you are welcome to have a non-committal conversation with me. My email address is at the bottom there, deo@truro.anglican.org. And we'd love to look to ways and hear from you about what it is you'd appreciate for training, what it would be good to do to support you in this role, and then how together we might help encourage the whole of the church in a journey through creation care. If I could have the last slide, please, Daniel. There are so many ways to express creation care, both in our church communities and in the wider community that the church connects with. I know in my own setting, where we are a rural church, we connect through the farming community. We connect through the school communities. We connect on a very just social level across the whole of our village. And to be able to speak creation care into these places and to listen and hear other people's views is a really powerful way of the church engaging in community. We have these three overarching principles: cherish creation, cut carbon, speak up. And I invite you to come and join with this diocesan vision and let us be a place that really is transformational for God's very good creation. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, Ben. A really insightful and powerful presentation. I particularly thought it was really helpful, those really key practical examples of how we can cherish creation, cut carbon, and speak up. It really makes it seem manageable and attainable for churches and faith groups, or indeed other grassroots organisations in Cornwall. Speaking of, we're now going to have a segment that we like to call Experts Through Experience, where we are joined by someone from Cornwall who is already doing some of these things and has some experience in these areas. And today we are joined by Martin Wright from Kenwyn Church in Truro. Hi, Martin. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I wondered if you could just quickly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit more about your role in Kenwyn Church.
Yeah, certainly. So yes, I've been attending Kenwyn Church for over 20 years now, I suppose. I'm a member of the PCC, and at the moment I'm in about the 5th year of being one of the church wardens, which is appointed. So the parish is actually the parish of Kenwyn and St Allen. So we have two churches in our parish. But I've always been interested in environmental matters. And when I first joined the PCC, we still do have kind of subdivisions. So we have like a fundraising and social subgroup of the PCC and a worship subgroup of the PCC. And I think it must have been about the time when the kind of the Green Awards, the Diocesan Green Awards, were first talked about by Andrew Yates. And so I suggested that there ought to be a separate subgroup of the PCC just looking at environmental matters. And that was approved and established. Although having said that, not everything that the Environment Group brought to the PCC received universal acceptance. Especially looking at some of the cost issues involved with some of the projects. But that's not to say that we still didn't forge ahead and thought what was within, especially outlined within the Green Church Awards at the time, were good things that we ought to be striving towards. And so I've always, yes, been interested in the green agenda, as it were. And as Ben was saying, caring for God's creation.
That's so good. Yeah, you mentioned there that you have an environment group, and it sounds like there's a lot of close alignment there between that and what Ben was saying about creation care champions. And these groups are already existing in and within faith groups. Yes. I guess most recently the church has set up a nature trail in the churchyard, and I wondered if you could share with us a little bit about that project and how it came about.
Yeah, certainly. So at Kenwyn Church, we have quite a large churchyard, presumably going back because the church was first consecrated in about 1259, I think the year was. So we have 6 acres, about 6 acres of our churchyard, which is kind of owned by the church. There are links with the Cornwall Wildlife Trust in managing it as a living churchyard. But we also have an agreement with the Truro City Council as well, who are involved in the management of the churchyard. At the moment, there is a nature trail. That kind of sprung about autumn of last year, when we were in lockdown and not being able to offer any kind of physical activities much, apart from our vicar streaming some of his sermons or talks online. But we do have a public footpath that runs through the churchyard, which is used quite a bit by the public and dog walkers. And it's also in fairly close proximity to one of the local nursery schools. So we thought it might be an idea, as people were still out and about and actually encouraged to take physical exercise each day, to put up a Christmas carol trail in the churchyard, and we involved the school children in drawing pictures of angels and things associated with Christmas. And then we put up posts with a Christmas carol on a post together, decorated by something that the children had coloured in. And so it made for quite a nice thing for children and families to look at whilst we were in this unusual situation of heading into the first winter of lockdown with COVID-19. And then we did a similar event at Easter, telling the Easter story through our churchyard. And so I thought, well, we've celebrated Christmas, we've celebrated Easter, why not just kind of celebrate nature itself? You know, it is, as Ben was saying, you know, all part of God's creation. So we found a book that's kind of fairly cheap to buy at a bookshop aimed at children, and we just kind of bought a couple of copies, laminated the pages, and then we're able to reuse the posts and stuck them on the posts. So it makes for a trail that people, anyone enjoying a walk then in the churchyard, can just look at the about nature. I think it's 49 facts about plants that we're using, and hopefully it would just cause people to stop and look and take in the environment and nature and where they are, rather than just walking through. Yeah, so it seems to have gone, both certainly the previous trails were well received within the community.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. I've seen some photos of the trail, and I think it's such a good opportunity to cherish creation, to stop and pause and just realize what we have around us and learn more about you know, other areas which we probably walk through many times and don't stop to think twice about. That's really great. Thanks for sharing that. I guess my next question is, one of the things that we often cover at Meet the Funders is project planning, and really encouraging people that anyone can get together and put together a team and do great work. I wondered if you could share a little bit about the logistics of setting up something like a nature trial. Who was involved? How did you plan it? And any top tips for any other people that want to do similar things?
Yes, I suppose, first of all, health and safety comes to mind, and risk assessments. And I know some people think, oh no, that's another burden that we have to go through. But actually, no, it is good to look at a risk assessment about putting up a walk in a churchyard or anywhere, in fact, and just considering the health and safety aspects, making sure that the path is fairly even and clean of debris, so that there are less risks of falls and trips and things, which isn't a bad thing to do. And then it's just establishing what sort of trail it's going to be. I know that at Easter we had a debate about which Easter story that we would be using. You know, we can have a debate amongst a small group about actually what it is we're going to be placing on the posts. One of the disadvantages in the recent nature trail is that the planning ran out of the school term year, so we weren't able to involve the schools at all. Whereas with a bit of forethought, I think it is nice that if you live in an area with a local school, I think it's always good to ask the school whether they would like to contribute in some way. As I say, whether it's just kind of colouring in pictures which can then be placed on the post alongside the main thing which you want to be putting in on the trail. And in that way, involving the local community, I think they then take an interest in the trail once it's actually established. So thinking about involving others and how you're allowing time for them to respond in such a way that their ideas can be incorporated. I suppose funding comes into it, and trails are really quite not too onerous on funds. I suppose the purchase of the posts was the kind of the big financial outlay, although that in itself didn't amount to much. And I think members of the group would look upon purchasing such things as part of their giving towards the church and the local community. And once the posts were bought, then we are reusing them for other trails. So it's not just something that we can just purchase once, it's something that can be reused in the future, provided we don't bang the posts in too hard that they break when we're putting them into the ground. Yeah. So and again, I think having a group is good because you can bounce ideas off each other, and I'm one with kind of plenty of ideas, but not necessarily all good ideas. So it's good to kind of have somebody that you can weed out what's good and what's bad, but also have input from other people that may have a different perspective that you hadn't thought about before, and can incorporate that as well. So I think doing it in a team is good. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. Recognizing the skills that each person brings to the team, and then sort of providing them an opportunity to harness those skills.
Exactly, and in involving other people, so that then they feel part of the project and they feel valued as to what they can bring, rather than perhaps just one person thinking, doing, leading it, and then perhaps kind of missing out on the community aspect that these trails can bring.
Definitely. Yeah, thanks so much for that. I guess final question then is, what's next for Kenwyn? Do you have any other environment projects you might like to pursue in the future?
We do. I'm glad you've asked that. We just had an environment subgroup meeting last night, where our thoughts are very much on the COP26 conference in Glasgow, and the diocese is asking us to think about holding a climate Sunday. And so we've decided to have our Climate Sunday on the 7th of November, which is about halfway through the COP26 conference, which seems a nice way of timing both events. And we've invited Ben Lilly, and Ben has graciously accepted to come along and to preach at both St Alan Church and Kenwyn Church on hopefully a climate or environment themed service that we'll be having. And we're hoping to make a weekend of it. Again, at the moment, we're living in these strange times because we're not quite sure what COVID regulations may be in force come beginning of November. We were thinking of having like a whole week of events leading up to the weekend and the Climate Sunday, but we think we might be better off just looking at the weekend and inviting Ellie Sheard, the Canon of Creation Care at Truro Cathedral, to come and speak to us about her work on the Friday evening. On the Saturday, perhaps having some outdoor activities. So we might have, once a month, I lead an outdoor gardening, churchyard gardening activity. So we might have an additional churchyard gardening activity. We're thinking about having a guided walk and talk through Kenwyn Churchyard. As I say, it's 6 acres, so we have lots of trees and plants and lots of interesting graves of people that have been and come from all parts of the world. And maybe have a litter pick, whether that's within the churchyard or going out into the community. We have local environment groups in Truro. We have a Truro Green Community website. The City Council has quite a few green places. And recently there's been the Friends of Coosbean and the Friends of Dubysmore. And we're hopefully going to be able to invite people to come and to speak at the church about what they do in kind of cherishing creation and those parts of Truro where nature does flourish. And then, as I say, Ben hopefully preaching then at our Sunday services, and we'll also be planting a tree. Unfortunately, we've had to cut down some trees, and part of the tree preservation order, there is a tree preservation order that covers most of the churchyard. So part of the consent in cutting some of the trees down was to plant a tree. And we thought having that Climate Sunday would be an ideal opportunity to actually plant a field maple in place of some of the evergreen trees that have been cut down. And being the first Sunday of the month, we also have our monthly tea time service. So hopefully we can involve the children and the families in the tree planting ceremony, and then followed on by their service, which hopefully will have a climate theme to that service as well. So that will
really
hopefully
wonderful.
culminate the weekend of activities. As I say, that's all kind of COVID regarding as to what we can or can't do concerning the regulations that may come out at that time, and perhaps also weather dependent on our, yes, we'll have to pray for some good dry weather.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for that, Martin. That's been really insightful, and it's great to hear that you've got a whole bunch of stuff lined up for the next couple of months. I think that's a good opportunity there actually to plug a creation justice toolkit that was put together by Ben Lilly and Transformation Cornwall, which has a whole wealth of resources to help churches thinking about Creation Sunday and COP26 and just the environment more generally. So as we come to the sort of final 10 minutes of our time this morning, I want to invite everyone in the chat to enter their questions or the Q&A box to any of our wonderful speakers this morning, and I will be happy to pose those for you. We had a question from Mike, which I think has been answered in the Q&A section already, but I thought it might be worth highlighting it just so that we catch it on the recording as well for the benefit of all. Mike said, we have switched to renewable electricity in our church, but haven't found a renewable gas supplier. Any hints about where to look? Ben?
Yeah, as far as I'm aware at the moment, Green Energy UK are the only UK-based biomethane producer, and I don't know whether that's only a bottle supply, so it is thin ground presently. I'm aware that on the oil side, there is an increased availability now on green oil, in effect. So the avenues are coming. They will cost more. But yeah, the green, I'm sure it is, yeah, Green Energy UK, as far as I'm aware, are the only biomethane producer presently.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Ben. We've also got a question from Irene, and I think it kind of relates to a lot of what Martin was telling us about. Irene said, how can I make best use of my garden? Jane.
Hi, Irene, and if I can just jump in there, it's great to have you with us, Irene. And I had some links there. I was kind of Googling it as you were talking. It's a great question. There's some, I've got some links for you. One is from the project, and they've got a great example of a bus shelter in Stockwell, which I actually know in South London. And we've got lots of Cornish examples of kind of community takeovers of spaces, guerrilla gardening and stuff like that. And Crantock Street in Newquay is a little project that, well, not so little, but a project that I know and is close to my heart. And also the Royal Horticultural Society, they've got some 10 top tips, and also there's some great resources around kind of environmentally friendly gardening on Cornwall Wildlife Trust website. So we'll make sure that all of those go out to you all.
Thank you for that, Jane. And Martin, I can see.
Yeah, if I can just add my thoughts on that. I suppose it depends how large the garden is and whether there's any grass or lawn in the garden. But one thing that I heard is stuck with me is that if you cut the grass, don't cut all of it at the same time. So you always leave a part that's growing and taller, and perhaps cut that bit the next time, but not the bit that you cut previously. And also I know a lady in Truro who has a front garden where she planted some wild seeds and just does not cut her lawn at all. And far from looking untidy, it's a kind of a real nice feature to look at.
And if I can just pick up on the question from Judith in the chat, has anyone had a grant to develop their garden? I don't know, Judith, is the absolute honest truth. My kind of initial thought would be that unless your garden is kind of large and kind of open to the public or in community use, then grants aren't available for that. I'll have a quick look from the Royal Horticultural Society and a couple of things there, but as a general, no. And I think it is, like Martin says, those kind of top tips, and I know Ben was saying about not cutting back flowers and stuff like that. So often it is around low cost, but I can see if there is any funding and and get that back to you. My initial thought would be no.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Jane. There was a quick question there about the Creation Justice Toolkit, and Ben very kindly put the link in the chat to that file. I'll also make sure that we attach it to the post-event mail out. The Creation Justice Toolkit is a document that was put together in collaboration between Green Christian, the Diocese of Truro, Transformation Cornwall, All Saints Hightown, and Churches Together in Cornwall. So there was a whole number of organisations that came together to put together this document. And I can see Ben has his hand up.
I was just going to come back to a second part of the question about working with the probation service. So in a previous part of my life, I've done that extensively, where we've worked with the probation service to provide meaningful work for people balancing out the effects of offences. I will say they have always been and have always needed to be in the public interest. So it's always about a community accessible space, or a churchyard that's used for multiple projects. So the probation service can be a fabulous avenue for conversation, but it generally is about wider community impact than the development of personal spaces.
That's great. Thank you so much for that, Ben. And then in the chat, no more questions, I believe, but there is a really nice comment from Donna, who says, our parish council has started a plant, seed and pot swap shelf outside the hall. Try to do this. I think that's a really wonderful idea.
Yeah, real.
Great. Thank you so much to our speakers, Martin, Jane and Ben. We've reached the end of our time today. I hope it's been a productive and valuable session. Again, as a reminder, everything will be mailed out, including the recording of this session after this. And I'd also like to take this opportunity to invite you along to our next Meet the Funders event, which will be on Monday, the 11th of October. And that will be covering top tips for filling out a funding application. So if you've got particular grants in mind that you'd like to be applying to, we'll have some information onto what to say, what sort of data to include, and we'll also have an opportunity to hear directly from a major grant funder that will be able to give their perspective on what it is they're looking for. So some real first-hand advice there. The booking link and instructions for that also to be sent. Anything else from our speakers before we break off for lunch?
No, other than thank you so much for our contributors. That was really, really useful. You know, just in terms of that funding issue, you know, I find this very difficult to kind of, you know, talk online around funding, because I never know who's in the room. Ordinarily, we do it in a community space with a pasty. Do please kind of follow up if you've got any questions. Let us know kind of where you are in your project, anything that we can do to kind of point you in the right direction of funding. We'd be delighted to hear from you. So just an invitation and a thank you, and thank you for your time.
That's great. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful rest of your days. Bye now.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.